Hello, Eugene Aiello here. Next video on our series is going to be about how electromagnetic energy is negatively affecting our quantum system. When I say electromagnetic energy, I'm talking about man-made radio frequencies, something that our body, any living organism, isn't going to be used to, meaning that solar radiation piercing through the atmosphere is going to be predominantly within the near infrared, visible, and UVA and part of UVB spectrum of light. Everything else is pretty much being blocked, except we do have a window where radio frequencies from space could be interacting with our bodies, but it's such a rare event. That would be during a solar storm or a mass coronal ejection. In 1890, when we invented electricity, our electromagnetic environment completely changed, and I believe that's interacting with our quantum system, and it's causing that coherent system that I was talking about earlier, that is sending that signal through the whole body, being absorbed at different frequencies by each individual cell. That is slightly shifted off tune. I believe the mechanism that's occurring at is within the pigment system. So when the pigment system is gathering each one of those different biophotonic frequencies, which is very specific, those are shifting slightly off their tune. And that's why I believe I was seeing the neurologic things that I experienced in practice. I also believe it's the reason why we suffer from allergies. That infrared, near infrared frequency being shifted off is what's causing that misrecognition of the allergen. So I'm going to start from the beginning here. In earlier video, I mentioned electromagnetic energy. We've got 0 hertz frequency here, ranging way up into extremely high frequency range. Dead center in this graphic is visible light, which is just a sliver: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Just to the left of visible light, we get near infrared, medium infrared, and then far infrared. If we go to the other direction, we're in the UVA and then UVB, UVC range. As we go further that direction, we're into X-rays and gamma rays. As we go further this direction, we're going to get into radio waves and then low-level electromagnetic fields, really low-frequency things, electrical devices and stuff like that. So in the center area, this green that I outlined, this area is what 98% of electromagnetic energy hitting our body at the ground level of the Earth is. So we're getting the near-infrared, UVA, and part of UVB. Life is adapted and utilizes this electromagnetic energy. That is the quantum system input. Even plants, everything, every living thing is taking in that energy. With plants, we like to just think of energy in the photosynthetic aspect, but there are pigments within those grain molecules, those seeds. That initial start of that quantum system does still produce some electromagnetic absorption that gets the system going. So kind of interesting to think of that. So what this graphic here is just different electromagnetic frequencies that we're absorbing and utilizing. We talked about ionizing versus non-ionizing in that other video. Ionizing radiation is going to be strong enough to bump up electrons off biologic tissues, causing damage. It could create ROS production out of control, denature proteins, DNA, mRNA, lipids, anything. We don't want biologic molecules having electrons ejected randomly. So ionizing radiation, we obviously know, is carcinogenic. It's going to denature your DNA. The good news is our atmosphere is blocking that. So from about mid-UVB all the way up, we're getting complete blockage from that ozone layer. When you get over to the other side, when you get into the middle and far infrared, again, we're getting atmospheric blockage. So water vapor is basically absorbing that electromagnetic energy, hence the greenhouse effect. The heating of the planet is created by that reflective of the infrared, far infrared, middle infrared from the surface of the Earth up. When we get to this area where we're in radio waves, our atmosphere does not block that at all. That's completely piercing through our atmosphere. Obviously, they take advantage of that because satellites are using radio frequencies, and there's no inhibition of those frequencies coming down to the ground. So when we're discussing ionizing, when you get into non-ionizing radiation is going to have an excitatory effect on those electrons in the valence shell of different biologic molecules. This area is the optimum for exciting electrons, meaning our systems are tuned, just the laws of nature. That's where those different absorptions are going to excite those electrons in their orbitals. When you get into these lower frequencies, you're still going to have an effect. They're still going to have a slight, how should I say, priming effect. So when these things are getting, radio waves are hitting a biologic tissue, that combined with other electromagnetic energy amplifies the effect, if that makes any sense. So it's joining, it's cumulative. So I mentioned that this isn't common earlier. Flares, mass coronal ejections, short periods of time, we're going to be hit by these things. Our biologic systems have the ability to adapt. There's a way that we can shift our body in tuning for short periods of time, meaning these electromagnetic frequencies, these quantum inputs, could be shifted. And when they are shifted during flares and mass coronal ejections, there has been patterns where influenza cases elevate, all kinds of different things. We get into moon phases affecting how people act. I'm sure with cosmic radiation, meaning radiation from other stars, that aren't even our sun are still having an effect electromagnetically down on the planet. So that shifting, we could adapt to it for short periods of time. After 1890, we don't escape it. There's constantly an electromagnetic man-made field that's hitting our bodies. I coined the term ambient electromagnetic pollution. As I'm standing here making this video, I'm getting hit by all the different satellite frequencies. Starlink, Amazon has a network up there now. China, Russia, everybody's putting networks up for communication. AM, FM radio, TV signals, satellite TV, Bluetooth speakers, every different frequency is coming from every different cell carrier is hitting you. It doesn't matter if you have AT&T on your phone, you're still getting hit by the Sprint tower, you're still getting hit by Verizon. So we are constantly bombarded by these frequencies. Interesting to note, I have read plenty of theories. It was very early on in my research I was running into this, that there was a correlation that the last major flu pandemics that we experienced in the last 100 years all correlate to when we invented new radio frequency technologies in the air. Prior to that, there was there was an actual syndrome that they noticed with telegraph workers. When they first people started getting exposed to low-level EMFs, telegraph workers were experiencing a syndrome where they were feeling sick. They were getting headaches, dizziness, nausea, heart palpitations, GI upset, muscle aches and pain, fatigue, anxiety, flu-like symptoms. Doctors were kind of perplexed by it at the time, and they thought it had something to do with the nervous system. They labeled this disorder neurasthenia. They couldn't put a rhyme or reason. Some people are susceptible, some people aren't. The theory, when we started putting this in the air, more people got exposed, it was a higher frequency, more people were affected, symptoms were worse. The flu, if you look at the symptoms of influenza, what are they? They're body aches, fatigue, anxiety, headache, sometimes GI upset. All those symptoms pretty much correlate more with, not pretty much, they do correlate with the theory of what electromagnetic energy does to our body. When I say electromagnetic energy, I should say that differently. Radio frequencies have a negative effect on the body. Guess where they found those negative effects are? In the mitochondria of the cell. So when a cell is exposed to radio frequencies, what they're going to find is we're going to have decreased ATP production, increased ROS production. When I learned about this, I already had this in my mind, that the only thing that they said was beneficial to that 635 nanometer laser I'd been working with is that those will increase mitochondrial function, meaning they're going to increase ATP, but they're also going to increase ROS. So back when I did that lecture on the Merburn model, that's when I discovered that, because it was making no sense, the conventional model of oxidative phosphorylation, that both of these would increase your ROS. Meaning ROS is in that model, ROS is a inefficiency of the system. So if there's an inefficiency of the system, how would that correlate to an increase? So electromagnetic energy is messing with those cytochromes somehow within the mitochondria. Now going back to influenza, influenza fits more of a mitochondrial dysfunctional disease than a viral disease. The viral model has been in question for many years, even though conventional science accepts it as fact. Is a virus causing the different diseases that they say it is? Is it causing influenza? If you were to search viruses, every virus has the same symptoms. Basically malaise, body aches, fatigue, headaches, GI upset, sometimes heart palpitations. So the systems in our body which use the most amount of ATP, produce the most amount of ATP, are going to be the most susceptible to this mitochondrial dysfunction caused by radio frequencies. The viral model asserts that viruses are going to attack a cell. They're going to be cell specific. So like a coronavirus or influenza virus are going to be targeting the epithelial cells of the upper and lower respiratory system. So that would make sense that when someone would have a viral illness, they would have cough, they would have those upper symptoms. But how do you explain the rest of the symptoms that are associated? Where does the malaise come from? Where does the fever come from? When ROS gets out of control, it's an exothermic reaction. It creates heat. ROS is responsible for thermogenesis. That's how our body maintains a temperature. So when you're examining the two concepts, viral model doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. The only explanation for fever in the viral model is it's the immune system creating the fever to somehow make it more advantageous for the immune system's enzymes to fight the infection. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Most of the symptoms don't make sense. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. There's more to that. I go into great detail in the book explaining what viruses are and why they would be associated with a mitochondrial dysfunction. The virus is what they think is a virus is present during the disease process, but it's not causing the disease process. So anyway, back to this. 1918 is when we invented radio towers. Well, we didn't invent them, but that's when we perfected them. During World War I, we created these towers all around the world so we could communicate. That was the same time the Spanish flu happened. In 1957, during the Cold War, is when we developed the NORAD missile detection system, radar detection of missile launches anywhere in the world. That's when the Asian flu occurred. 1968, during the Vietnam War, we started launching satellites up for high-resolution photography and communication. That paralleled the Hong Kong flu. 2009 was an interesting one. When I was reading this theory, 2009 kind of sold me on this. This has to be examined deeper. This is probable that what we think of as influenza is a mitochondrial illness. 2009 is when we went from 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi to dual band. It was now 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Swine flu, if anybody out there remembers it, was pretty odd. It didn't affect anybody 5 years and younger, and it didn't affect people 65 years and older. That is classically the group of people who are most susceptible. They're most immunocompromised. Kids are going to be exposed more to germs and everything in their mouth. So they were not getting swine flu. 5 to 25 was the most common age group for the swine flu. Well, that dual band Wi-Fi wasn't in grandma's apartment or in her house. Younger kids weren't exposed to it. It was in the schools and it was in the workplaces. So that's what correlated to those people getting it. So kind of interesting. With that concept in mind, I was kind of tying, okay, radio frequencies negatively affect the mitochondria. Radio frequencies also, by the way, negatively affect our red blood cells. If you expose red blood cells to radio frequencies, it causes them to become misshapen. The concave, biconcave center of the red blood cell will disappear. It will become bloated and misshapen. Well, our red blood cells, interestingly enough, have no mitochondria. So that whole concept where I was talking earlier about ROS generation to make ATP, red blood cells are kind of their own little floating island. They're not part of the quantum system. When they transit through the skin, right at that basal membrane of the epidermis, they're getting that electromagnetic energy. If you remember, near infrared and red can pierce to that level. So those red blood cells are absorbing that energy within those heme molecules, same as a cytochrome. They're creating their own ROS reaction. So when red blood cells are exposed to a radio frequency, something's happening to that system. That electromagnetic system is shifting. These guys are not making energy like they're supposed to, and they're no longer as healthy as they used to be. Leads to high blood pressure. High blood pressure has been getting studied in a different light. They're starting to find that the medications for high blood pressure that are vasodilators of the medium and small sized blood vessels are ineffective. They're a temporary fix, but over time your body adapts to it. The newer theory is saying misshapen red blood cells are increasing the viscosity of capillary blood flow. So when I read that and I started thinking about this concept, I'm like, oh my goodness, this electromagnetic energy is probably why all these people are getting high blood pressure. So kind of an interesting model to look at. What's exactly happening? How are radio frequencies negatively affecting us? These radio frequencies that are hitting these mitochondria in a lab, or hitting these red blood cells in the lab, well, red blood cells, I'm sorry, I'm not going to say that again. Red blood cells are getting hit as they go through the skin, but deep in our body, our mitochondria are not getting hit by these radio frequencies. It'd be a surface exposure, which, yeah, that will tie into why viral infections have lesions on the skin, chicken pox and shingles. Those are all the reactions at the skin level from the dysfunction, from the shifting of frequency. Those cells are going through apoptosis. They're not functioning like they're supposed to. So what's going on? I'm going to go back to the pigment system. So when I have these little lines here that are the electromagnetic energies that we're absorbing in our pigment system, the pigment system is absorbing that energy and transferring it again into those very specific frequencies. I think what's happening in the system is when you're interacting with these radio waves that are 24/7 exposed to the system, these things are getting shifted off a tune. Now it makes sense, I told you earlier, that these radio frequencies interacting with our system is going to prime those electrons, meaning those electrons that are getting excited are going to be more excited when they get their normal exposures to these radio frequencies that they're used to. So you would think that it would cause a shifting of the frequency that way. So the red frequencies would shift more towards the orange frequency. So the input of the system would be slightly off tune that direction. What's interesting is when I was working with my lasers and I was testing those different things, remember when I talked about the allergy treatment, that 635 red laser worked, anything else this direction worked, but not 650 or an infrared laser. So when I'm doing my treatment, I'm actually shifting it the other direction. I'm sorry, I'm actually correcting for a shift the other direction. So our biofrequencies are shifted in this direction. Therefore, if I use a laser that brings it this direction, I can make a correction. If I use a laser outside on the other end of it, I'll actually worsen the condition. What I mean by that is when I'm doing neurologic muscle testing, if I use a near infrared on one of those dermatones, it will actually make the muscle weaker. If I tweak down, that's how I can figure out what that dermatome is functioning at, just by narrowing which one strengthens it. So we'll go from it's weaker, and all of a sudden it's strengthening. That tells me that's the frequency approximately where that nerve dermatome is at. So how is this happening? Why is it that it should be shifting that way, but it's shifting this way? I hope you followed that. So instead of that frequency shift in our body being that direction, more towards violet, it's shifting the other way. The only way I can explain this is within that thalamus, within that system where all these quantum inputs are first approaching the system, our body must have an ability to shift itself back into tune. Meaning, these not so common things, biology has figured it out. When we get shifted off tune, the system has the ability to bring it back, almost like a reset point. I kind of think of it as like zeroing in a scale. So I'm assuming during the dark hours when we're not exposed to daylight is when our body goes through that shift to compensate. So when you're sleeping and exposed to those radio frequencies, your body's adapting to that and shifting it. Then when daylight hits, your frequencies are shifted off. When I'm doing my treatment and I'm using a laser on the opposite direction, I'm helping that body shift back into where it should be, and it compensates for it, and it's stuck in that position, meaning now it's corrected. So the electromagnetic field that's around you at that point that I treat you, you're shifted to it and adapted to it. So theory, right? It was very interesting because summer of 2019, if you remember, I said that's when I found that shift in my patients. So I was normally seeing people that were having a right thalamocortical dysfunction. All of a sudden, everybody was hitting on the left. Well, that parallels at the point when Elon Musk started launching the Starlink satellite system, 12 gigahertz frequency. So my theory at that point was, oh, okay, this is what I saw summer 2019. I finally found a correction for it with the laser. I was using the red laser on those dermatome C5, C6, C7 like I was talking about. Over time, new frequencies kept coming up, meaning new systems are constantly being put in the sky, put on the ground in cell towers. Amazon had launched a system. When they launched the system, patients that were already adjusted and I was no longer having to do tuning treatments on, they're coming back with that left weak again. So I started figuring out that every time a new frequency started coming out, a new electromagnetic pollution was existing around us, and our body was shifting and compensating for it, and they needed another correction. Unfortunately, over the time that I've been doing this, I can't even tell you how many different new things have popped up. The worst of all was July of 2023. Elon Musk's Starlink system is now at that second generation satellites, which are 80 gigahertz frequency. Well, as these different frequencies kept coming higher and higher in frequency, I started finding I needed to use a stronger and stronger laser to make that correction. So when I used to be able to use a red, now I have to use a green. Where I used to be able to use the blue or the green for the green fix, I have to use a blue. For the blue, I have to use a violet. So pretty amazing to see that theory of electromagnetic energy shifting the quantum system and it paralleling that my correction had to get better and more intense. Same thing happened with the allergy treatment. I used to just use that 635 nanometer red. It stopped working the spring of 2023, and I had to start moving to a different frequency. So currently, I went from using a red 635 red, now I'm using a green, and some people actually require a blue to make the same correction. So quite amazing. Going back on the ionizing versus non-ionizing, it doesn't matter. We're dealing electromagnetic energy is affecting our body, and it's an excitatory effect on our pigment systems, and it's altering that quantum input. Once you alter that quantum input, that whole system is off tune. So the master glial system up top that's directing that coherent frequency of the whole body, now those frequencies are slightly off tune. So that mitochondria, that cytochrome, that's primed for a certain red frequency being produced from that microtubule system within that individual cell, it's going to be slightly off of frequency. If it's slightly off frequency, ROS production is going to change. If you remember my Merzyme, not mine, Morales Merzyme concept, that you have a concentration of that reactive oxygen species in that MER zone. It's creating an equilibrium reaction to create ATP. If this concentration alters, you're going to start experiencing what radio frequencies do. You're going to have less ATP made and more ROS, because that ROS is diffusing. It's not being used up in the process. So going back, radio frequency illness, the symptoms of the flu, that's not all that's going on. I think type 2 diabetes is also a result of this. Type 2 diabetes has nothing to do with insulin and insulin receptors. Type 2 diabetic medications, metformin, the most common one, it's affecting how glucagon reacts within the liver to release sugar stores. So type 2 diabetes is a state where the liver is releasing stores of sugar and elevating fasting glucose when it doesn't need to. Why is that occurring? Well, these cells that can't make ATP are sending information through the quantum system. They're starving. That starving message is making the pancreas produce more glucagon. At the same time, the pancreas is producing insulin. Those two hormones should be at opposites of each other. Type 2 diabetes, that's what we see. A slightly elevated insulin level and an abnormally elevated glucagon level and an elevated blood sugar. So these cells are starving because they can't make ATP and they're calling for it in the system. That's why sugar's high. It has nothing to do with binding. You know, classic theory of diabetes is that insulin molecule and that receptor, there's a resistance to it, meaning either this isn't binding like it should, or excessive blood glucose is making it so less receptors are being exposed on the cells. Just by common sense, it doesn't even make sense. Nature doesn't give up. So if there's excessive amounts of glucose, the cell's not going to say, well, I'm going to make less receptors to adapt for it. The cell's going to put those receptors out when it needs sugar. And if you remember what I mentioned earlier, that receptor is acting as a dipole antenna. It is sensing that signal from the insulin molecule as it transits through the capillary system. When that signal is hitting that dipole, that's just telling the cell there's plenty of sugar, take it. So the cells will uptake sugar. So what is the tie-in to all this? Basically that we have a system that conventional science does not understand. This quantum system, it's the system that drives everything in our body, every reaction. You start exposing us to radio frequencies 24/7, you're going to throw the system off. You're going to throw physiology off. I only mentioned the mitochondria. I only mentioned the red blood cells. you got to figure out how many cytochromes are in the body. When I was talking earlier about the liver has cytochromes, the pituitary has cytochromes. When you're shifting all these frequencies off, you're affecting multiple aspects of physiology. So it's an area that needs to be studied more. And the unfortunate thing is, this isn't going away. It's a big business, and they've got plenty of their own research out there saying it doesn't have health effects. That Telecommunication Act of, God, I don't remember what year it was, Bill Clinton signed it. Basically, within that Telecommunication Act, no village can deny a permit for a cell tower based on health concerns of the citizens. So basically, that act said, these don't affect you. Ignore it. We've already proven only ionizing radiation is going to have a negative effect. So is there a recognition that that system exists in the science community? Probably. They're not going to research it though, because they know you're opening a can of worms here, because you're dealing with a very big business there in the telecommunication industry. So they'd rather keep on giving you metformin instead of addressing the actual problem. So hopefully this was clear. Hopefully I didn't run on too much and I covered the point, but I just wanted to get the information out that we have a system, which I've detailed already in this series, and what's affecting this system is our radio frequency exposure. So the book has a lot more detail, I highly suggest you purchase the book and read it. This is just a little bit of a review for people that are reading the book and a little confused. Hopefully this nudges them along. So next video, I'm going to start talking about quantum physics and quantum biology. It's going to be a fun topic. It's going to get more into detail of what all this excitatory electrons and how that gets those proteins exhibiting data within the microtubule system as there's interactions within those microtubules. How does that convert to data? That's within the quantum system. So thank you for watching the video. I hope to see you soon.